I have a question regarding Romans 8, uh, 29 through 30 regarding predestination. It's a pretty, I guess you would say, confusing verse to a lot of believers and non-believers from the point that when some people read this, they come up with the conclusion, no matter how I live my life, the Lord predestined me to be saved. But then I look at verse 29, that first word, it says, for whom he did foreknow. Could you expand on those two verses for me to help me get a better understanding of that, sir?
Sure. Well, here, let me just say one thing. There's all these verses that indicate God's sovereign work in salvation. Then there are other verses that call on people to believe, human responsibility. And sometimes you even find them right up against each other, human responsibility and God's sovereignty. And the Bible makes no effort to reconcile those things. When Spurgeon was asked how he reconciles them, he says, I never reconcile friends. So they're both true. They're mysterious. I think that as far as the heavens are above the earth, so much higher are my thoughts than your thoughts, and my ways above your ways. That's Isaiah 55. The mind of God is far greater and can comprehend these things better than my mind or your mind, Eric. So let's just remember that. Let's go through it. He foreknew. To foreknow means to know beforehand, and the biblical sense of the word to know is to enter into a relationship. Just you can even see it in the Bible. You know, God, the man knew his wife. That's a relational term, and so God foreknew. He knew, not just didn't know. Does not just mean that he knew in advance who would believe. It means that he knew us. We entered into relationship with him before time. He foreknew us. He predestined us. He determined in advance that we would be conformed to the image of his Son. And he also called us to believe. There's two calls. There's the general call in the Scripture that everyone should believe, and then there's the effectual call to believe in Jesus, and we will. And those he called, he justified. He declared us righteous. And those he justified, it says he glorified, and it uses the aorist tense of completed action, but that's yet to happen in the future. It's called a proleptic aorist, something so certain that it's spoken of as a completed action, even though it hasn't happened yet, because it's so certain. So that's what it says, and all those things are true, and nevertheless, he calls us to faith. If you read Romans 10, it says, how should they believe unless they have a preacher, right? It says, how can they call on him they have not believed in? And how can they believe without hearing about him? And how can they hear without a preacher? And so what it's seeming to say is people have a responsibility to believe, and they need to hear the message. How can both those things be true, that God will predestine those people who are called, and at the same time, we have to preach the good news? You know what? They're both true. And we have to just live with that.
And it also feels like there's some actions that the person or the believer has to take. You just can't sit on your morals and think everything is hunky-dory.
Yeah, your person's got to respond to the faith, to the call to faith. I love the scene in The Silver Chair by C.S. Lewis, where Jill Catchpole, I think that was her name, Jill comes to Narnia, and she's speaking to Aslan the lion, and she said, we called out to you, and that's why we're here. And he said, you would not have called had I not called you here. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. You know, I don't want to appear simplistic. I know that there are people like my friend Michael Van Lanningham who are smart enough to understand how sovereignty and free will work. I'm just not bright enough. So I live with the mystery that both are true. I totally believe, though, I would not have believed had not he called me first. So, but I do believe I have responsibility to everyone and call on people to believe and trust God with it.